function is a unit of code that represents a sequence of statements that perform a specific task. Functions can accept arguments or values and may or may not return a value. Advantages of functions are that they are reusable and can save you quite a lot of time. Functions can also be called anywhere in a program, depending on its scope. Now, there are two types of functions. You have your standard library functions, which are defined in C++, and you have your user-defined functions, which are defined by the user. So we'll be focusing on both types of functions, but mainly on user-defined functions. So now let's take a look at some examples. Now, C++ allows the programmer to define their own function, and a user-defined function groups code to perform a specific task, and that group of code is given a name or identifier. So when the function is invoked from any part of the program, it all executes the code in the body of that function. So the syntax to declare a function is the return type, function name. You may or may not have parameters, but if you do, they can be separated by commas. And then you have your function body between your curly braces. So let me give you an example now of a function declaration. So let's set up right here above int main. So and we'll do the simplest type of function, I believe, just to print something to the screen. So the return type in this case will be void, because you're not actually returning any type of value. You're just printing something to the screen. So that's all you really have to know about a function with the return type of void. So let's say void, and let's say prompt. So if we wanted to prompt a user, so in this function we can just say cout. Let's just say enter a value. All right, so that's it for our function. We have our return type, function name, and we have our function body. So now the name of the function, of course, is prompt. The return type is void, and the empty parentheses mean that it does not have any parameters, and our function body is between our curly braces. So in order to call this function that we have declared, we have to call it from inside our int main, and we call it using the actual function name. So let's say we want to call our function. Okay, so our function name is prompt. So we need to type prompt, and we can see here in our IntelliSense is telling us that we have a function with a return type of void, and of course we need our parentheses in order to call that function, and let's not forget our semicolon. So let us run this program, Control and F5. And we have our user prompt, or prompt as we called it, enter a value. Okay, so that's the simplest type of function you can declare, one that doesn't actually return a value itself. It simply returns a printed statement. So continuing on this example, if we would like a function that simply prints a number and we want it to pass the number to print as a parameter, we could define a function for that also. So let me define a new function. It's also going to have a return type of void, and this function's name is going to be print num, and we are going to pass it a number to print. So it will be a return type of int, and we're simply going to cout our number. So whatever number is passed into this function, whenever we call it, that's what will be printed out to the screen. So let us test this function. So first let us declare a number for it to print. Okay, so let us say int, let's say n equals 14. And let's comment this out for now. So in order to print 14 out of the screen using our newly defined printNum function, we simply call it from inside our program. So let us call it, and now we have to pass something to it. So you see here we have our function signature. It's a void, and it accepts one parameter that is an integer. Okay, so now we already have our integer defined here. So let's pass n to our program, and then let's run our program, and it should print 14 for us. Okay, so there you have it. We have a function that will print any integer that is passed to it. All right, so that's an example of a function with parameters, and let's take a look at a couple more examples. Let's say we even wanted to expand on our printNum function and allow it to also print a double. So we would add another parameter here, and we would say, or let's define a float and let's call it num2. Change that to num1. So we will say cout the int number it's num1, and let's throw an end line here. And then let's also say the double number is, and this will be num2. Okay. All right. So now back in our program, let's create another integer, or double rather. So let's see if we can actually create a double. A float should be able to display a figure that is a double. So let's say n2 equals let's say 7.65. Oh, sorry about that. So let's clean this up. All right. So now we have an error here on our function call, because now that we hover over it, we see that it's accepting two parameters, or arguments rather. So remember that if you pass two parameters to your program when you're defining it, then you must match the corresponding parameters with the same number of arguments. So here we are getting an error, so it wants, obviously, okay, we had n1 and there's still an error. So if we were to run this, it would not run. So F5. So we're still only getting one function, or one digit printed. So let us add our new parameter, and this is num2. Okay, so now let's run our program. Right, and now you get 7.65, and you can see the formatting is a bit off. right, I forgot my colon and space. So if you do not add any space inside your text, what you're joining or concatenating to this line of text will be right up against it. It will not have a space. So let's run it one more time. And here you can see the int number is 14 and the double number is 7.65. So in these last few examples, we have used void in the function declaration. And this means, as I've said, that the function is not returning any value. So it's also possible to return a value from a function. And for this, we will need to specify the return type of the function during the declaration, just the same way we did with void. So then the return statement can be used to return a value from that function. So let's take a look at an example of a function that adds two numbers and actually returns that value. So let us define the return value to be int, and the name of our function is add. And this function will have two parameters. So I'm using A and B as my signature. And of course, we have to return a value, so we can simply say return A plus B, and that will return the sum of these two numbers, right? So again, we have the data type of int instead of void, and this function actually returns a value, so we can execute this function and see how it works. So inside of our program, let us actually create a variable that will hold this value. Okay, so I'm going to create a variable called sum, and we will store the value that is returned from our add function inside sum. So let me just add a little note here. So store we're storing the return, the value of the add function in sum. All right, so let us call our function down here, and let us comment out our print num example, and now we're going to call our add function. So down here, before we call our function, let us actually call our function up here. So let's say now that we have our variable, let us say sum is equal to, and we're going to add, and now I'm going to manually enter two numbers to add. So let's say we want to add 200 and we want to add 56. Okay, so whatever the add function returns should be stored in sum. So now let us do a cout. Let's say 200 plus 56. My typing is horrible today, so end L. All right, so let us run this program. Right, so we have 200 plus 56 is equal to 256. So we were successfully able to store the value returned by our add function inside and a variable that was created to store that value, okay, and then print it out in our cout statement. All right, so one thing to note in the examples that I have just done is that the code of the function declaration had to be done before the function call, and it should be done before the function call. However, if we want to define a function after the function call, we need to use what is called a function prototype. So an example of a function prototype. So let us actually clean these functions up, because as you can see here, this is the beginning of my code, and I wouldn't want to have, right, all this space used up with function declarations. We'd much rather just have the function prototype or function signature, if you'd like to call it, or think of it as that, above my int main, and then have the actual function body defined after int main at the end of my program. So let's clean this up a bit. So what is meant by the function prototype? So the prototype simply just provides the compiler with enough information about the function name and its parameters. So then we can use this function to call this signature to call our function before the function is actually defined. So you see here, we call the function add, but it is defined after or before. So if I was to move this entire function, and let's just cut this function and let's add it to the end, so after our closing brace for int main. If I was to do that and then try to run my program, there would be errors. So if I click yes, just to see the errors, it would say the add identifier not found. So what it was actually running just now is what it ran before. All right, so if I was to start it in debugging mode, it would still give me that error. So the reason for this is that we need the function prototype of add to be above int main, so that this function call will know what the function add should do. So let us define a function prototype. Okay, so what we would like is the return type, function name, and it accepts 2 parameters of int. Okay, so this should be all you need. So if we were to start in debugging mode, our program would actually run without any errors this time, because this function call is seeing this function prototype, and then this function prototype now knows what to do because the body of the function is defined here. So let's do that for the rest of our programs, our functions. So let us cut this and paste it. So then we want to just simply say under our function prototype, void prompt, and in this case we have no parameters. And then the last one, void print num, and we can say up here that it returns a void, name is print num, it accepts 1 int and 1 float, and that should be good. Okay, we're getting an error. Okay, no, we're not. So the name is spelled correctly. So if I was to call, let me uncomment Okay, so all our functions run. So we get our prompt, we get our second function call with the integer and double, and we get our addition function call. All right, so that's really all you need to know about function declaration and prototyping in C++. Just ensure that you have the function signature before the function call. And this, as you can see, it cleans the code up quite nicely, so you don't have to be scrolling too far before you reach the main section of your program. You just use your prototypes at the beginning and then define your function bodies towards the end.